Hello and welcome, everyone. We are delighted that you are joining us for tonight's presentation. We're going to let our friends log in. It takes a few minutes for everyone to log in, and we'll get started in just a few moments. But while we're getting everyone logged in, I will explain a few things. My name is Holly Boakey. I'm the Family and Community Partnership Coordinator for the Clover Park School District. I am delighted that you are joining us for tonight's presentation on suicide prevention for family and caregivers. And we have worked hard to bring you this information, and whether this is for you and your family, or maybe a friend of your child's, or a niece, a nephew, a kid in the neighborhood, I believe that suicide is something that often touches our lives, whether we want it there or not. It's something that is more prevalent in our community, and so we want to start the conversation. So important to start the conversation. So we're hoping that you will be part of our conversation tonight. At the bottom of the screen, if you are not so familiar with Zoom, but you wiggle your mouse, you'll see that there's something called the Q&A, and there's also the chat feature. Please feel free at any time during our presentation. If you have a question, you need clarification, maybe you missed a portion, please put that either in the Q&A or in the chat. And so I will be monitoring that. Liliana will be monitoring that, and we'll be able to answer your questions. We'll also have time at the end of the presentation if you have further questions. But please feel free during our presentation, if you have a question or a comment, do put it in the chat. This, because we can't be in person, is our best way of really everyone leaning into that conversation. I'm delighted to introduce you to our guests tonight. Our guest presenters are Stacy Swilley and Liliana Caracosa. Stacy is the Behavioral Health Program Manager, and Liliana is the Behavioral Health Advocate, both with the Puget Sound Education Service District. Now, the PSESD, as we call it, Puget Sound Educational Service District, is one of our great community partners, and they help support us in doing the work and supporting the behavioral health needs of students and families in our district. So Stacy and Liliana, we are so happy to have you here, and thank you for bringing us this really important information.
Thank you, and thank you for the lovely welcome. It was wonderful. My name is Stacy Swilley. We're here tonight to talk about some suicide prevention that caregivers and family members can use with youth of all ages, because as much as we don't really like to think about it, this does impact all ages. So introductions, if you would like to drop in the chat and introduce yourself, you're welcome to do so. If not, that's fine too. If you want to say hi in the chat, you could drop your name, your role, one thing that you hope to gain from this training. So for instance, my name is Stacy Swilley. I'm the Behavioral Health Program Manager at PSESD. I'm also a parent of a 15-year-old and a 9-year-old. I'm a community member, and I hope that I can offer you the information and best practices to support caregivers in understanding suicide. Liliana, I will let you introduce yourself very quickly.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Liliana Caracosa. I work as a behavioral health advocate. And as you can, I actually went to a Clover Park School District school. I graduated from Clover Park High School. I'm a community member. I advocate for behavioral health and mental health within my community. And I want to hear directly from youth what their experiences are with mental health and how we can best support them. And that's a little bit about me. Thank you.
Wonderful. I hope that we'll hear from some parents in the chat. That'd be great. So before we start, I do want to thank our community partners, Clover Park, as we said, partners with Puget Sound ESD to help us reach the families and students and even the staff of our schools in the district. We have had quite an experience the last couple of years. The behavioral health needs are extremely high right now, and we want to be able to do anything that we can to be able to help the community. I've also got here information for a Common Voice. They are a community group that provides peer training for parents. So there's parents that support parents. You can contact Nicole Murphy. Her email and phone number is right there. She's responsible for Pierce County. And they do lots of education, training, and parent support groups for families that are experiencing behavioral health challenges. So our goals of tonight, first we want to understand the prevalence of suicide, the signs of escalating risk in our children. We want to be able to identify if a child is needing support, what supports are available within the community, and also what we can do to support our students and youth as well. We also want to educate ourselves on what actionable steps we can take in supporting our kids' mental health. So we will be talking about a how-to of addressing signs of suicide when you might be concerned about your student, how to talk to them, what are the best practices. So we will give you some tools that you can use to have those conversations and what to do next. First, before we start and really dig into the topic, I want to recognize that it is a very difficult topic to talk about. We have over 47,000 suicides yearly, in the US. And on average, each suicide impacts at least 25 people around that individual. We're talking about family members, community members, anybody who really has come into contact with that individual or is exposed to that individual's death is impacted, and sometimes it's a lifelong impact. So I do want to acknowledge that suicide impacts not just the individual, but those around them. I understand that there may be people in this group, there are likely people in this group who have struggled with thoughts of suicide themselves or lost somebody close to them to suicide. Talking about this topic can bring up feelings and emotions. So right now, I'd really like you to write down one of these phone numbers, just in case you do find that this talk right now is bringing up emotions that are difficult to deal with. We want to make sure that you also have the support that you need. And we will also be hanging around a little bit after the presentation. So if you would like to talk, if you would like us to connect you with some resources, we will be here to do that. So our first section, we have times up here for each session. They are very, very loosely planned. We will be getting through a lot of information, and we want to give you the opportunity to ask questions. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A or in the chat. We'll be monitoring that. I know Holly is helping us with that, and also Liliana. So please do share them in the chat, and we will move through this through section 1, myths and facts. We're going to talk about some statistics that are specifically relevant for Pierce County. We'll talk about risk factors, protective factors, some warning signs, as I said, what you can do as intervention. Secondly, we'll talk about community supports, how to identify those trusted adults in a child's life that they can turn to. And we'll also be talking about some local resources and giving ourselves time for a Q&A at the end as well. But like I said, if you have questions along the way, please feel free to drop them in the chat. Our key messages here, we want to be very clear about this, is that suicide is often preventable. The taboo, the fear, the stigma around suicide that we all feel, it reinforces the problem. It drives us to not talk about it, which really puts up a barrier for our students, our kids, to be able to talk about their experiences with us. And that is exactly the opposite of what we want them to do. We want to encourage them to talk to us. We want to recognize that caregivers play a unique role in prevention. You know, the attention that we have, that we can give our children, is essential. And the interventions that we can do as parents and caregivers really is unparalleled. Our individual skills matter. And the 3-step model that we will be talking about for intervention is based on our current research, best practices, and it has been found to work. And we're all part of the solution. We want to come together as a community. We do suicide prevention training that is very similar to this with school staff. And I believe that it's really essentially important to have community members that are involved in this prevention as well. So on to our myths and facts. There are many myths about suicide, why it occurs, how we talk about it. One of our myths is if a person is determined to kill themselves, there isn't much that can be done to stop them. The reality is that even the most severely depressed person has mixed feelings about death. There is a period of time where somebody who is thinking of suicide will spend thinking about it in a way that they are unsure, they're not committed to it. So even up until the moment that they decide to attempt, they can be stopped. And we want to make sure that absolutely crystal clear. Most suicidal people do not want death. That is so important to understand. When somebody is at the point where they are considering suicide, it is not about the death. It is about wanting their pain to stop. And I think that if we can understand that somebody who is contemplating suicide is in so much emotional and mental pain that they cannot bear the thought of another day, then that is when suicide is the best option in their mind. What we need to understand is that depression is treatable, and suicide is a very permanent solution to a temporary problem. Next myth we hear a lot is that teens are just dealing with emotional turmoil of growing up. You know, the emotions, the volatility that they feel, it's just a kid thing, right? Like we think that it's just teens being teens. Even hearing that they are trying to get attention. The fact is that depression is not an attitude. They're not just being moody. It is a diagnosable medical and mental disorder, because we really want to be clear that mental health is health. So it is a medical mental disorder. Depression is treatable, as we said, and youth and adults who are depressed would most often benefit from professional treatment. There are many ways that we can intervene. There are many ways that we can get help for somebody who is suffering from depression. And teens do suffer from depression. There is 1 in 4 mental illnesses develop between the ages of 14 and 24. teens are in their prime time to be experiencing, the onset of mental illnesses such as depression. We need to validate that and take them seriously. So just a summary of our facts here.
Question, Stacy. If there's a family history of depression or mental illness, does that increase the likelihood that we may see those signs in a teenager as they're going through that 14 to 24 year span?
It is a risk factor. It's one that we'll see when we go over our risk factors, but it is a complex relationship. If there is mental illness in the family, it doesn't automatically mean that a kid is going to experience mental illness. We want to make sure that we're not having our children feel like they have a sentence that they are ultimately going to experience mental illness. But it is a risk factor to be aware of.
But likewise, just because you don't have it doesn't mean you can't
Absolutely
present with depression. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. So another myth is talking to teens about suicide or asking a teen if they are suicidal is risky because it might put the idea in their head. The fact is that you cannot put the idea of suicide in somebody's head. It just doesn't work like that. Really, if suicide is going to be something that is thought about, it's coming from that experience of depression. You may have a discussion with a child and mention suicide. Later on, they may come back to it and say, you know what, I am thinking about this. That doesn't mean that you've put the idea in their head. It normally means that you have made it okay that they can talk about things that they have already been thinking about. So please keep that in mind. Bringing up the subject, discussing it most openly is definitely one of the best things that you can do. So some facts about youth suicide. We want to talk about how much of a problem it really is. What is our current state right now of youth suicide? An average of 2 youth between the ages of 10 and 24 die by suicide each week in Washington state. Youth suicides outnumber youth homicides by a great number. They're actually the second leading cause of death for Washington youth. Suicide risk is reduced by increasing protective factors and working to change risk factors. And as I said, we're really going to look at those protective factors and risk factors so we know what we're looking for. And peers and adults outside the family also play a key role in prevention. There are a lot of people in both Pierce County and King County that we work in. A lot of people are involved in this work in studying and responding to youth suicide issues. And this is the information that we have seen come out of it. So our population's at higher risk. I want to, before we even go down this list, I want to be very clear that many of these populations are not at higher risk because of any quality or innate traits that are unique to that population. The reason that they are at higher risk is because of their lived experience. So youth living with mental health issues are at a higher risk, especially if it is untreated and unrecognized. Youth experiencing stresses, either current or past, poverty, abuse, violence, racism, or living in low resource communities. Once again, that's experiences that they have lived that have put them at risk. Youth and vulnerable identity groups. We're talking about the LGBTQIA youth. These youth are at a higher risk when they experience exclusion and victimization from the community, from their family, from their peers. The risk is greatly reduced for youth who are accepted and feel included in their community. So that is really important to remember. Reach out to these kids and make sure that they feel involved, make sure that they feel accepted and valued as part of their community. Likewise, Native American youth, Latina adolescent girls, foster care youth, and alumni, so children who have aged out of foster care, homeless youth, Black youth. It's actually the third leading cause of death for Black youth. And as I said before, this is all based on their lived experiences. Youth who abuse alcohol and other substances are at a greater risk, based on the use of those substances. It makes them more impulsive, and that's where the higher risk comes from. Often also youth who are abusing alcohol and substances, not just experimenting, but actually abusing substances, are generally doing so out of self-medication for mental health issues. And obviously youth who have attempted suicide before are at a greater risk as well. So we need to definitely keep an eye on these kids. Now, yeah.
I just wanted to add something real quick about the last slide. We also have to remember that a lot of these populations, for example, let's say we might have a female Latina student who is also LGBTQ, right? So there's intersections happening within those factors. So that can also increase those risks. So just to have that in our minds as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Liliana. So there has been a lot of assumptions made about the impact of COVID-19 the last 2 years on youth suicide rates and mental health in general. The data has been quite surprising, actually. It really did catch many of us off guard. Overall, youth suicides have not increased significantly since the beginning of the pandemic. If we look at 2018 and 2019, they're very similar levels for 2020 and 2021, which, considering the isolation that youth experienced, the uncertainty that was really went against everything that we expected to happen. What did happen is visits to emergency departments saw an increase for psychological distress, suicidal ideation, suicidal attempts, and suspected overdoses, which we do want to pay attention to when we're talking about suicidal attempts. They saw this increase, and that was not reflected in an increase in suicide rate. So we want to really make sure that we are following the data on this issue, because as we said before, with myths and facts, it's very important for us to address the issue with facts to be able to respond to what's actually going on. So we don't really understand right now what exactly caused this phenomenon of suicides remaining level, whereas visits to emergency departments fluctuating. What we do know is that having people in a child's life who can respond and take them to the emergency department is crucial. During COVID, we had a lot of students, at home, not at school. A lot of adults and caregivers were forced to stay home with their kids. So we had that extra supervision, the eyes on, and we also were concerned about the impact that the pandemic and the conditions around it would have on their mental health. So we had more people paying attention to the mental health of these students. And it's entirely likely that this is what drove the increase in emergency department visits. And what we really need to take from this is that all of these visits to emergency departments for suicide attempts and suicidal ideation is a life saved every single time. So we know that intervention works. Now, onto our risk factors, which we've mentioned a few times already. I'm not going to go through the entire list here, running down it. As Liliana mentioned, having multiple risk factors, whether it is intersecting identities of gender identity, race, history of suicide, all of these intersecting risk factors increase exponentially the risk of suicide. So we see here that there are a number of categories of risk factors. The personal experiences is very important to pay attention to. If there is a sudden stress, if they're experiencing bullying, if they're experiencing social isolation, exposure to a suicide, if they have known somebody close to them that has attempted suicide or had a successful suicide, they are at a higher risk when they're combined with other risk factors here, such as depression, substance use, a family history of mental illness. If they have poor problem-solving skills, they just haven't developed them yet, which most kids are at that level where they haven't really developed their problem-solving skills. If they feel trapped, that there's no options. All of these risk factors here increase the possibility that a child may consider suicide. Now, I want to pull out bullying specifically, because it's something that is not well understood and difficult to address. So most youth who are involved in bullying do not become suicidal. Not every kid becomes suicidal because they experience bullying or they are engaging in bullying. Persistent bullying can lead to feelings of isolation. It can contribute to the development of depression, and that can increase that risk towards suicide. The really interesting thing when it comes to bullying is that it's both the perpetrator and the victim are at elevated risk, which is a little counterintuitive at times. Normally we think of the perpetrator, the kid who's bullying, as not at risk, but the data shows that they are at a higher risk also. So what can we do to help this situation? It is hard to address. It really is. We have tried so many different things in schools. Some things are successful, some things just aren't. And we're not always sure why. What we can do as caregivers, as parents, is to watch for signs that bullying is occurring with our children. Watch for signs that they are actually bullying other kids, and call them out on it. If you hear them talking about other kids in a way that is hurtful, call them out, draw attention to it. Ask them, like, why do you think it's okay to say that? Ask them how they would make them feel if that was said to them or about them to somebody else. And really one huge thing right now is pay attention to social media. These kids are exposed more and more to social media, and a lot of the bullying happens online. So if you are not necessarily monitoring your kids' social media, just ask them to show you things, like ask them to share, encourage them to share what they're looking at online, good or bad. You don't have to say, show me what your friends are doing that's awful. Just ask them, show an interest in it, so that you can keep an eye on it and don't write it off as kids being kids.
There's a wonderful resource called Common Sense Media. We actually did a parent academy using Common Sense Media materials, and there's a lot of great information for parents about bullying. So if you're at a loss and you don't know, please, Common Sense Media, and I'll put it in the chat, is a great resource. Lots of resources for parents. So I'll put that in the chat as well.
Thank you. I appreciate it. That is a really good resource to use. We've used that with some of the students as well in our schools. So protective factors are really important to know also. We talk about risk factors, and it can feel like, it can be very negative, but kids also have protective factors in their life, and they can act to balance out some of those risk factors. And the great news is that we can actually increase the protective factors that our kids have. So, the usual ideas of increasing their self-esteem and their self-worth, their problem-solving skills, their mental health is obvious. But if we also encourage them to have strong family connections and be able to talk with their family members, the trusted adults in their community around them, we can restrict access to things that may be used in a suicide. I know that can get difficult at times, but simple things like, locking up weapons, making sure that we're locking up medications, are definitely ways that we can protect our kids from this. We can also increase their hope as well, hope for the future, increase their feelings that they are capable and competent and able to make decisions for themselves, can actually increase their sense of hope, but also their problem solving and their confidence in themselves to be able to solve difficult problems. Because, as we said before, suicide is a solution, a very permanent solution to a temporary problem. But if we have those problem solving skills and we feel confident in our ability to be able to solve problems, suicidal ideation tends not to happen as much. So fostering protective factors, teach your kids it's okay to ask for help. Encourage them to. If they come to you and ask for help, then listen. Give them the time. And if you don't have the time, because let's face it, kids tend to want to talk at the most inconvenient moments, like when you're in the middle of doing something or driving, and talking about a very big issue is not necessarily the easiest thing to do. Acknowledge that and say that you'll come back to it, and then do come back to it later. Say, hey, you mentioned this before. I really want to hear about that. It just encourages our kids to be able to talk about things that are bothering them, that are really causing them problems, and give them the sense that people are there to help and people are there to listen and they care. Encouraging participation in school and community activities helps them feel included. a lot of the times, students who are experiencing suicidal ideation feel very isolated. If they are involved in activities and community groups, then that isolation isn't as prevalent. It's also good to pay attention to community activities and sports and things like this that students should be involved in or want to be involved in. Because if the kids start dropping out of these activities, that is a sign that maybe something is off. Once again, acknowledging their emotions. They have big feelings sometimes and they don't always know how to express them or process them. Be a good listener as often as you can. We're all pressed for time, but carving out time for your kids is really one way that we can protect them. A big part of suicide prevention is making sure that our kids have somebody to go to that they trust and they can talk to. As much as we want to be supportive parents, they don't always want to talk to their parents about stuff. I understand. I have a 15-year-old, and sometimes I'm the last person that she wants to talk to about things that she's experiencing, no matter how understanding I want to be about it. But making sure that your kids have trusted adults that they can talk to when they're having big problems. Who do you trust for your kid to go to and talk to about their problems? And making sure that the trusted adults in your child's life also know what to do and how to respond in times of crisis or understanding kids' mental distress. When it comes to how suicide risk works with confidentiality in the schools, it's important to understand that suicide risk is always an exception to confidentiality. I know that I've previously worked in schools as a counselor. I have somebody in my team who is in Lakes High School as well. They are bound by confidentiality, especially if a child is over 13. They have the right to seek out their own mental health services. However, if a child is expressing suicidal ideation, if they are at imminent risk, that counselor, that school staff, they have a duty and a responsibility to break that confidentiality and notify parents. Staff should never, ever promise that a student's writing or what they tell them will be confidential in all situations. Sometimes staff will notice students increasingly writing about concerning issues like suicide and death. So they need to also be aware that that is not an issue of confidentiality. That is something that needs to be shared with the parent. Staff do have protocols on reporting. Every school district has a policy and a protocol for suicide prevention, suicide intervention, and postvention. So how to respond after an incident. Their protocols are generally publicly available, and perhaps Holly can respond to that on Clover Park's policies. But the teachers are trained on this multiple times. So they are all aware of the policies in the district.
Yes, teachers, counselors, we go over this quite a bit. But again, I like what you said. It's like we can't promise confidentiality in all cases because think of yourself as the parent right now, wouldn't you want to know? And so that is why that we are going to call you and let you know when and if your child has expressed these types of things in school. So rest assured that we're not trying to keep anything from a parent.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
That's the last thing anybody needs.
No.
Okay, so some experiences that may increase risk, specifically, the death or an illness of a family member, a close friend or community member, including another teen suicide in the community. We may not always be aware that our children are somehow linked or friends with, or come into contact with another teen who has committed suicide. So if there is a suicide in the community, check in with your kids, talk about it. We're breaking that stigma. We're talking about it being okay to talk about these big issues. So if there has been an incident in the community, that is a good time to check in with your kids. If there's a loss or a sudden change in circumstances, problem with peers, breakup, bullying, conflict with friends, I know these things all sound very normal teenage things, especially, in high school. They often also happen in elementary school, middle school. We don't want to ignore them, because if a student has some of those other risk factors, these experiences can compound that and make it so much worse. Major stresses like failing a test, unplanned pregnancy, as much as we don't like to think about it, these things can happen. Family conflict or being arrested, being abused, feeling socially isolated, having access to firearms or other lethal weapons, all of these things increase risk. I know that this always comes up as a bit of a hot topic when we're talking about suicide risk, but access to firearms is a great risk. And I'm not making any statements about that other than reducing access to risk, locking things up is one of the best ways that we can protect our kids. Our warning signs, what we want to look for in our kids, they may talk about wanting to hurt or kill themselves. If they are looking for access to medications or weapons or other means, if you find anything hidden in their room that they shouldn't have, and it would be dangerous if it was misused, that is a warning sign, and it's not enough just to take it away. We really do have to talk about it at that moment. Talking, writing about death or dying or suicide, expressing hopelessness. We have heard high school students in particular being feeling very hopeless now that they've come back from a 2-year break from school. This year has been very difficult for a lot of teenagers trying to find their feet, and not knowing where things go from here. Are they going to have another lockdown? Are they going to graduate from school? Are they going to find a career afterwards if they're struggling in school? There is a lot of hopelessness being expressed right now, and we really do need to pay attention to that. If a child has a lot of rage, anger, or they seem to be talking a lot or trying to seek revenge for things that they feel wronged for, that can be a sign that something is going on. Acting recklessly, engaging in risky activities. Once again, that seems like a very teenager thing to do, but it is worth keeping an eye on. If they talk about feeling trapped, if they're using alcohol or substance use, and especially if you notice that this is not just a one-off thing, that it seems to be a regular pattern of use, that is definitely something to be concerned about. If they're withdrawing from friends, family, the community, if they're withdrawing and dropping out of their activities, That's a sign that they're in distress. Dramatic changes in moods, once again, can easily be written off as a teenage thing, but we're talking about changes from baseline here. You know your kids. You know, we expect some moodiness when we come to teenagers. They may not want to talk about stuff, so we may not understand why they're in certain moods. But if that moodiness really becomes, it starts interrupting with their ability to carry out their daily activities, if it starts interfering with their ability to maintain friends or relationships, that's something to be concerned about. If they seem overly anxious or agitated, if they're sleeping all the time or being unable to sleep, giving away prized possessions is really one of the #1 signs. Pay attention if things are missing from your kids' items that they have. If they are giving away things at an increasing rate as well, then that is definitely something to be concerned about.
So I think that also goes with friends. If your son or daughter says, well, this was weird, so and so gave me, this was his favorite, or this is her favorite, I can't believe she gave it to me. You can be that trusted adult in that child's life, because it may be things that your own children bring up about friends, like, gosh, you know, she used to hang out with us all the time, now she never does, and she gave me her favorite necklace and she's just acting different. Those are signs too, and that's why we're doing this, is for you to be aware, not just in your family, but in that greater community.
Absolutely, and thank you for bringing that up, because it really is a community effort. We're all involved here. You know, we do see our kids' friends. You know, we notice different little changes about them, and it's okay to mention that. You know, I think we do all need to play our part in this. It's important that we are paying attention, really. So on this next slide, I have a video that I want to play for you. It is one that was developed in Washington State. It's very powerful. So once again, I recognize people's feelings and how they may feel about this. If you are finding it difficult to watch, I do encourage you to get up and get some water, you know, perhaps write down one of those numbers and decide to stick around after the end of the presentation to have a chat with us.
I have my ups and downs, just like anybody else.
Maybe more than anybody else.
I can be hard to figure out.
And I like my privacy.
I don't want you looking over my shoulder all the time.
But you know your kid better than anybody else. And if you think he's acting different than usual...
Acting really down, crying all the time for no good reason.
Or getting really mad. Not able to sleep, or sleeping too much.
Shutting her friends out or giving her stuff away.
Acting reckless, drinking, using drugs, staying out late.
Suddenly not doing stuff he used to love.
Or doing stuff that's just not like him.
It might be nothing to worry about. It might just be high school.
Or it might be something more. He might be depressed.
Not just feeling down, really depressed.
It might be that your kid is thinking about killing himself.
It happens. More than you think. More than it should.
And people say, I had no idea.
I thought it was just a phase he was going through.
I never thought she'd do it.
I wish he'd come to me.
I wish he'd said something.
I wish I'd said something.
When it's too late. So if you think your kid's acting different, if she seems like a different person, say something.
Say, what's wrong? How can I help?
And ask straight out. Are you thinking about killing yourself?
It doesn't hurt to ask. In fact, it helps.
When people are thinking about killing themselves, they want somebody to ask.
They want somebody to care.
Maybe you're afraid you'll make it worse if you ask. Like, you'll put the idea in their head.
Believe me, it doesn't work that way.
It doesn't hurt to ask.
In fact, the best way to keep a teenager from killing herself is to ask, are you thinking about killing yourself?
And what if they say yes?
Or maybe.
Or sometimes,
Well, here's what you don't say.
That's crazy.
Don't be such a drama queen.
You're making too much of this.
That boy's not worth killing yourself over.
That's not going to solve anything.
You're just trying to get attention.
You're not going to kill yourself.
What you do say is,
I'm sorry you're feeling so bad.
How can I help?
We'll get through this together.
Let's keep you safe.
A lot of people think about killing themselves, adults and kids.
most of them never try it, but some of them do. So if your kid says,
I'd be better off dead.
I can't live with
I'm
this.
gonna kill myself,
Take her seriously. Find someone she can talk to about it. Someone who knows how to help.
Sometimes kids want to kill themselves because something happened. A breakup, a failure.
But sometimes it goes deeper, and it's not going to go away by itself.
Get some help. Talk to your doctor.
Or a counselor at school.
Or your minister.
but don't just let it drop.
And make sure that your kid always has someone to turn to. Someone he trusts.
Make a list together right then. 3, 4, 5 names.
Put a suicide hotline number on there too.
Have him keep that list in his wallet, so he always knows where to turn.
Make sure your home is safe.
If you have pills she could use to hurt herself, lock them up.
If you have a gun, don't just lock it up. Get it out of the house. The bullets, too.
And one more thing. If you think your kid might be about to hurt himself, don't leave him alone.
Take him to the emergency room.
Call 911 if you have to.
We all have our ups and downs, but sometimes it's more than that.
If you think something's wrong, the only way to find out is to ask.
Ask straight out. Are you thinking about killing yourself?
Don't wait until you're sure. Trust your gut.
Because it never hurts to ask.
And it can make a big difference.
All the difference.
In your kid's life.
That was very powerful to hear it in the kids' words, isn't it? Wow, that was really well done.
Yeah, and I do like playing that video because it really does sum up everything that we've talked about so far and kind of leads into, our intervention steps that are coming up. But there is something about hearing it
From
from the mouths
from my
of
kid.
children
Yeah,
that
so
that
true.
really makes a difference. Yeah. So talking with our teens is not always the easiest thing to do.
Nor convenient. I loved when you said that.
Never
That's so true.
convenient, right?
Nor convenient.
Absolutely. I know that my kids always choose when I'm driving to ask questions, the big questions, which can be really difficult. So if you do want to express your concern and talk to your kids about things that may be going on with them, make sure that you pick a good time if you're bringing up the conversation. As I said before, if they start talking about things and it's not a good time to be talking about big issues, and tell them that you want to talk about it, but now's not a good time and you're going to come back to it. Give them a specific time. After dinner, can we talk about this? When we get home, can we talk about this? And then follow up with them. So be conversational. Try not to lecture your kids. I know how hard it is. I do it and I catch myself and I think, oh gosh, what am I doing? So it's okay to step back and say, you know what, let's just have a chat. Let's talk about this. Be honest. Your kids know when you're not being 100% truthful with them. Being authentic and just really breaking down that barrier gives them permission to also be honest with you. If you are direct and tell them exactly what your concerns are, try not to skirt around the point. Sometimes we try to kind of hint at things, hoping that they'll want to talk about it. But, kids don't always catch those hints and they may not pick up on it. If they are willing to talk to you, if they do catch up on, hey, mom or dad or grandma or, whoever is in my life talking to me about this is really truly interested and they want to talk about it, make sure that you listen. Don't interrupt. Don't, offer advice right away. Don't try to fix things that they talk about, or tell them that they shouldn't worry about it. Just listen. Give them the time and space to share how they're feeling. If you hear something that does worry you, you talk about these issues and something comes up that rings alarm bells, just encourage them to talk more about it. Tell me more. Yeah, I want to hear more about that. And you can revisit the conversation anytime. It doesn't have to be a one-off conversation. This can happen over and over again, as many times as it needs. And even if your child is never having thoughts of suicide, having these conversations does not hurt. It makes them feel safe and secure and cared for. And that's one of those protective factors that we really want to make sure our kids have.
When you're having those conversations with your teen, I think is also important. If it's difficult to bring up the conversation, even showing a little bit of your own vulnerability can even increase the chances of your kid opening up to you, right? So just not being afraid of that vulnerability, right? I think vulnerability can be a great asset to having those difficult conversations.
Absolutely, yeah. Sometimes we have to choose when we're going to be vulnerable, but yeah,
Yes.
that being vulnerable is so important to our kids. So our 3-step intervention process is really simple. It's expressing concern, asking the question, and finding help. It's 3 simple steps. It can take a lot of courage, and it can be an emotional process to even start. So we want to walk you through these steps. I do want to point out that there's tons of different models that people use for responding to suicide. There's training that will go over so many different methods, but they all boil down to these 3 steps that are the core components for responding to a kid that may be thinking about suicide. I also want to point out that this also works on adults. So, if you do have an adult in your life that you're concerned about, you're noticing these warning signs in adults, you can still do this. We can do this with pretty much everybody. So step 1 is expressing concern. If you notice some of these warning signs, if you notice that the behavior is just like a little off, they're really starting to move away from their baseline, normal, average behavior. That's when to have this conversation and tell them why you're bringing it up. Say, I've noticed that you've stopped going to soccer practice. Maybe your kid keeps coming home on the bus when they should be at their activity. I've noticed that you've quit going to soccer. I feel concerned because you used to love soccer and I want to know what's happening. I want to help you. I care about you. You seem like you're really struggling right now. Can you tell me more about that? Making sure that they understand you're on their side. You're not grilling them. You're not quizzing them and lecturing. You're on their side. You care. You want to help.
I love that you gave us the words. That is so great. Sometimes our parents just don't even know where to begin. And so just having those words, use the script, it works.
Absolutely. And that's something that honestly, if you are concerned and you do have some time that you want to plan to have this conversation, you can think of your own script, like think of your words, practice it if you need to. Planning ahead of time will help you choose the right words and at least just get you in the right frame of mind so that you can convey those feelings and that concern in a positive way.
Definitely.
So people who have survived suicide attempts, there's been a lot of research where they interview people who have survived suicide attempts. And the most important thing, the most helpful thing that they will constantly say is that somebody listened. There was one man who survived an attempted suicide from jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge. And he now goes around the US giving presentations, talking to people. And when he tells his story, he says that the entire way to the bridge, he told himself, if just one person stops and asks me if I'm okay, if one person talks to me, then I won't do it. That's it, just one person. He, went the whole way there. He had to walk across the bridge. And I don't know if you've ever been, but it's a long bridge.
It's a long bridge.
It's a long bridge. I think about how he must have been feeling every step of the way. One person did stop him and asked if he could take a photo of them at the bridge. And it was just a missed opportunity. And I imagine him walking along, probably visibly in distress by the time he reached the bridge. So this is something that we do need to pay attention to. We can't assume that somebody else is going to do it. Ask the question, ask your family, ask your kids, ask your friends. The worst thing that can happen is they say, no, I'm not thinking about suicide. And that's honestly great. The best thing that can happen is you manage to save their life. When you're listening, listen with compassion, remain calm. And that's really hard when you're a parent talking to your child about these things. It can be really easy for that panic to start rising, or you want to fix it right away. These are things that we really want to avoid. We want to make sure that we listen, we validate their feelings, make them know that it's okay to feel like this, and just let them know you care about them. I know that seems like such an obvious thing to say to a parent, but sometimes our kids don't really catch on. Sometimes they don't feel it because they're caught up with how bad they're feeling about other things, and they just need to hear it in that moment.
So telling them it's okay to feel this way, but avoiding saying, don't worry, it's all going to be okay.
Right. Yeah. So basically saying, you're not broken.
Your feelings are valid. Of course, it's okay
Absolutely.
to feel this way. Yes.
Yeah.
But and I fall into that. I'm guilty of wanting to fix it. I'm the parent who wants to fix it, but they're not
Absolutely.
7 anymore that I can fix it possibly. So but allowing them to have their feelings, to express their feelings, and remain calm I'll tell you, that can be challenging when you're very worried about your child.
Oh, definitely. No, I feel it because, when my 15-year-old comes out with like things that she's experiencing, sometimes it just automatically, I want to share advice. Like I have a whole life of experience and advice to give, but she doesn't need that at the time. She just needs me to listen because she needs to talk about it. So managing your reactions is really difficult. As we said, just avoid arguing with them. Don't tell them they're silly, that they shouldn't feel like that. Don't ignore any hints or any of those warning signs. Don't brush it off. You can bring it up right now. If they say, it'd be better if I wasn't here. ask them the question, you know, don't let that just hang in the air and don't dismiss it. Remember that you don't have to be the expert and have all the answers to everything. You can give yourself permission to be human. This can be a really emotional conversation. It's okay to show your kid that this impacts you as well. So if you do have a chance, if this is something that you have planned to have this conversation with your child, you can talk to a friend, somebody to support you beforehand, and afterwards too. Is always a good idea to have somebody that you can talk to just to process what happened.
And it could be a good opportunity to also maybe practice and even catch on those little habits that we have, right? When we might get defensive or we want to fix the problem right away. So it can give you a good opportunity just to like practice how you can bring it up better. So I think
absolutely. Yeah. So asking the question is something that, you know, just seems like we're saying, oh, just ask the question, right? It's hard. It's really hard to do. It's hard to do as a professional, asking a child that is not yours these questions. It's even harder to do when it's your own child. So ask in a way that really encourages them to be honest. We don't want to say, you're not thinking about killing yourself, are you? We don't want to give them any reason to believe that it's not okay to be honest about this. As we said before, use any signs that you've noticed, any risk factors that can be part of your expressing concern step, and be direct. Don't try to skirt around the issue. Be direct. You can use the word suicide, and do prepare yourself to hear the word yes. You're asking this for a reason, and you want them to be honest with you. And once again, that asking about suicide is not going to put this idea in your child's head. So something that you may want to say, some way that you may want to ask this question. You know, sometimes when people feel hopeless, they're thinking about suicide. Are you thinking about suicide? One way to phrase it that I like to use with younger kids is, are you thinking about going to sleep and not waking up? That may be something that they relate more to rather than an actual act of suicide. As we talked about very early in this, suicide is not always the intended goal. The intended goal is to stop the pain. So once you've asked the question, we have some follow-up that we need to attend to. You have to listen to the presence of a plan. And this part is really kind of like assessing how much of a risk level we're at right now. Is this something that you're thinking about and we have time to get you mental health services? You know, is it something you're thinking about? We have time to connect you with a professional? Or is it something that we need to secure your environment right now and not leave you by yourself? Or are we at the point where we really do need to go to the emergency department and seek help immediately? So our 3 follow-up questions are, have you decided how you would kill yourself? You're looking for a plan. Have you decided when you would do it? And have you taken any steps towards actually carrying out suicide? These 3 stages are really how things progress when we're talking about the steps towards suicide, from ideation, having thoughts about it, to actually acting on these thoughts. A higher level of planning means a higher level of risk. a lower level doesn't necessarily mean there is no risk. We do want to connect those kids with professional help. We can't just say, okay, well, maybe you'll be fine. You know, it doesn't really work in a way that that's just going to go away. We do need to get these kids help. So if they say yes and they have a plan, that third question is, do you have access to the means that you are planning to use? You know, and if you are really concerned, you may ask them to give you the means that they're planning on using. Perhaps they have already put them in their room or their backpack, or they already have a plan of how to get them. You know, like I said earlier, if you have found that they are hiding things in their room, they may have already taken medication and hidden it in their room. Weapons they may have got their hands on. You have to remove the danger. It's absolutely essential that you remove that danger. It is entirely likely that just removing the danger buys you enough time to get them professional help. Mm-hmm. So consider also chemicals as well. Chemicals is one thing that we do see. We actually track rates of calls to poison control, because often those are suspected suicides or suicide attempts. So finding help, we need to act immediately. We need to really take steps right away. When we've assessed the risk, we need to know what to do. So planning this in advance is really a good idea. If you do have time to plan this out, even if you're not suspecting that your child is going to be suicidal in the future, knowing where to get help is just good planning. You know, it's like having a fire extinguisher next to your oven, or, you know, seatbelts in your car. It really is just good practice to already be aware of these resources and these steps to get help for your child, because the urgency really is important. So ideally with a teen at risk, you want to call the Pierce County Crisis Line. They are able to refer you to mental health professionals. They're able to give you advice on you know, the information that you can share with them, what steps to take at that time. And if it is a urgent need, they can actually contact emergency services to come to you. That doesn't always involve police or EMS or fire department. That can also be in the form of having crisis responders come to your home who are trained to deal with mental health crisis. This slide, I don't quite agree with it, because it says even if they will not agree to stay, safe, do not leave them alone. Even if they do agree to stay safe, don't leave them alone. Make sure that they are supervised, if not by yourself, by somebody else, somebody who is responsible, who understands how to get emergency help immediately. It really is essential that you keep these kids in line of sight, eye contact. You know, we don't want this to escalate. And of course, if it's a life-threatening emergency, call 911. There is actually a phone number 988 that is coming online in July that is not fully operational yet, but please look out for information about that. 988 is going to be our mental health crisis line. So it's an easy number to remember if you're not able to remember that Pierce County crisis line. So this can take some de-escalation. This is an emotional conversation. Your child is likely going to be in a decent amount of distress. So de-escalating that emotional distress is really essential because we want to keep them safe. We don't want to make it worse. Speak slowly, confidently, speak gently with a caring tone of voice. That can be really hard when you are also probably in mental distress, emotional distress right then. Don't argue with them. Don't tell them that they're not going to do that. As we saw in that video, these things are not helpful. They make the child clam back up again and want to push people away. They feel threatened physically, like their brain response is that fight or flight in that situation. So we really do want to bring the temperature down in the situation. Try to use positive words instead of negative words. We don't want to be using things like, you're not going to do that. We don't want to do this. Giving a sense that there's judgment involved. We really want to avoid that. Use language like, this will get better. We can help. Let's get help. I'm going to stay with you. I'm going to be with you through the whole thing. Don't restrict their movement. So that is also something that triggers that fight or flight and increases their distress, is restricting their movement. That kind of goes counter to like making sure that you keep them supervised. But really, you can keep them in an area without restricting their movement. If they want to walk, if they want to pace, it's okay. They're going to feel very threatened if you try to stop them from moving. And be aware of anything that may exacerbate or increase their fear or aggression. If there is something that they have experienced in the past, be aware of that and be mindful that certain situations and movements and phrases may trigger an increased response. And it's okay to take a break from the conversation. It's okay to sit in silence. It's okay just to take a moment and tell the child that you're doing that. Say, hey, I think we're all getting upset right now. I think this is really becoming difficult to talk about. Let's just take a break, and sit with them. Tell them that they don't have to talk for a moment. It's okay. So what happens after you get help? And this is something that a lot of people get very concerned about because they don't know what happens next. If you take your child and manage to get them to a mental health professional, whether it be through a referral where you make an appointment to go see them, or you go to the emergency department and they have a mental health professional speak to your child, they'll do a mental health evaluation, which is basically an assessment that is provided by a licensed mental health professional. Not anybody can just do this. It has to be a licensed mental health professional. They do an assessment to decide whether your child will benefit from further mental health services. Now, in cases of suicidal ideation or attempts, that should be a yes. They should be giving you a referral at that point. The services that they may provide, if you have a younger child, they may provide play therapy. Individual or group counseling can be offered. Medication is often, if they're experiencing signs of a diagnosable mental disorder, medication is usually discussed. And if medication is involved, they should also be getting counseling at the same time. Giving medication is not a magic trick. It doesn't work just by itself. You really do need to follow up with that counseling if the child is taking medication. And they will always recommend that whatever services they offer or suggest will be the least restrictive setting. So they are not going to hold them in hospital unless they absolutely have to. If there's a concern that your child is at risk of suicide, a specific evaluation will be conducted to determine the actual level of risk, and that goes into the decision of what is the least restrictive setting. So it's important that if you are getting a mental health evaluation for your child, that you do mention that suicidal ideation is a factor. Questions to ask the individual who's providing the evaluation. Is my child at risk of suicide? You may have had that conversation with your child. It may have not come out to a definite yes, but you still want to seek services. So we want to ask that question. So ask them, what factors came into that decision? How did they come about that determination about the risk of suicide for your child? You can ask, what is the reason that your child is at risk? Maybe there's a specific situation that you need to be aware of. The mental health professional should always be developing a safety plan with your child. And ideally, the caregivers should be involved in that safety plan. Also asking what type of follow-up they're recommending, how to create a safe environment, what things do you need to do? Your child may tell their counselor, the mental health professional, something that you're not aware of. So we want to make sure that we're getting all of the information so that we can keep them safe. And we need to also be aware that the school can be an amazing supportive environment for your child. They spend a huge amount of time at school in their buildings, and there are staff and support staff like counselors, and some schools have mental health professionals and student assistance professionals to check in with your kid. I know that the person on my team who's in Lakes High School, in cases where there are kids having issues with suicidal ideation, they increase the number of check-ins that they do. And sometimes they'll do it daily, just have somebody come in and check in with them, just so they can know that somebody cares at school, that there's somebody to talk to. And also so that we know what's going on with that kid too. Now, it is important to note that teens who are aged 13 and above are able to seek services without consent of a parent or caregiver. That is by law. The provider may only share information if they believe sharing that information is beneficial to treatment. So some of these questions that you have on this slide here may not be answered by the mental health professional that they're seeing. They may not tell you the specific reason for the child's risk. If it is not really deemed to be beneficial to the treatment or keeping that child safe. It may be something that is kind of irrelevant, that if there was a specific situation, there may be other things that are bigger, that are more relevant.
But they won't keep you from knowing that your child is at risk of suicide.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
So,
No,
so
they
when you
will
said
tell
some of
you.
these questions, that is an important one. You will know that.
Mhm.
And it's important for you to know
Absolutely.
as a parent to know that.
Yes. Yeah. And honestly, most, the vast majority of mental health providers will talk with the team to encourage them to involve their family in any kind of safety planning and any kind of treatment that they have, because the reality is that mental health professional is only in that child's life for a brief amount of time. They work to develop a healthy support system around that child that can really provide that protective factor in the future and moving forward. So just be aware that if you do have some pushback on some of these questions, that may be why. So as I said before, right at the beginning of this presentation, we are important members of the prevention team as caregivers. We are essential to this. We have a unique role to play, and we have an ability to be partners in prevention. And we provide this training to school staff. Obviously we want as many people in the community to have this information so that we can all be able to respond to students who are in distress and maybe considering suicide. So be an advocate for your child. Make sure that you are vocal about what your kid needs. If your child is having suicidal ideation, it is a good idea to talk to the school. Ask to speak to their counselors. The schools have protocols that they can put into place to keep your child safe. They can monitor the safety plans to make sure that everything's okay. And just keep a closer eye and make sure that, they're not falling through the cracks. Be alert to what's going on with young people in your community. As Holly said before, we can keep an eye on other kids as well. We do need to be aware of what everybody in our community is experiencing. And if we do notice these risk signs, these warning signs, it's okay to bring this up, or tell somebody who can bring it up. If you notice, one of your kids' friends is they've got some warning signs going on, it's okay to talk to their caregiver and say, hey, I'm worried. What have you noticed? Monitor their behavior, especially alcohol and substance use. We said earlier that alcohol and substance use as itself increases the risk because it increases their impulsivity, kind of shuts off that part of the brain that makes good decisions. Generally, if it's a habitual thing, if it's substance abuse, they're self-medicating and there's a bigger problem involved. If your child needs mental health services, be an educated consumer. And really what that means is know what questions to ask. And if you're not sure, you can ask the mental health professional that's helping your child. Don't be afraid to say, I don't know what that means. What can I do to make this a better outcome? How can I support my kid? You can ask these questions of them too.
I love the part where it says, be nosy. I used to, growing up, I would say that to my mother all the time. It's like, you're so nosy. And she said, I'm not nosy. I'm interested. And I've always used that with my own children. It's like, oh no, I'm just interested. I'm very interested in what your friends are doing, what they're saying. What did you do? What happened to so-and-so? Where did it? Because I really did see your children grow up in this community of friends, and you get to know them well over the years of having them in your house and on different teams and such. And so I really do want to say for families and coaches. Thank goodness for coaches who notice, notice kids, notice, be interested in them, talk to them, hear them. And it's those things that you hear that may raise a red flag. And that wouldn't you be so glad that you raised the red flag? Then you said, oh, I always wondered. I wish I would have, should have, could have, would have. We don't ever want to have that conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is so important to bring up, is that, we don't want to live with regrets. And, also in going along those lines, we did mention that there are likely people who are watching this, who are, actually involved in this presentation right now, who may have lost people in their lives to suicide. Something I always want to tell people is that you cannot blame yourself for something you didn't know. So you may be listening to these things and you may be, thinking in the back of your head, oh man, that was a warning sign I missed. Or, oh, I should have said this, or I should have said that, or I shouldn't have said this. You cannot blame yourself for something you didn't know at that time.
And you're here now educating yourself,
yes.
which is, I think, so important to know and
Absolutely.
and educated.
Yes, absolutely. So please be kind to yourself if you're watching this and having those thoughts. So here's some community supports for caregivers in Pierce County. We'll be sending out this presentation. You'll get these slides and you'll be able to get the links that go with this. Family Supporting Families is fantastic. A Common Voice is the group that I mentioned earlier that provides peer support for families, so families helping families, which is invaluable to have somebody who knows what you're experiencing. The Family Council and, oh gosh, Liliana, please help me remember what this stands for.
I was going to say, if you get 10 points, if you can remember what the acronym stands for.
It's the Youth and Families Thrive Now Task Force. It's a meeting. Right. Yeah. I will include that in the chat too.
Thank you.
I appreciate it, because I get it in my head and then it's gone every time. Okay, here's some more Pierce County resources that are not specifically like direct service resources that you can turn to for help. If you Google or get this link, Pierce County Behavioral Health Services has a list of resources that are available in the county. Kids Mental Health Pierce County providers are also a great resource. It's basically a list also of specific providers. The PSESD community-based organization list for King and Pierce County can be quite a list to go through. But if you're stuck and you're not sure where to turn, that can be a good place to try to track somewhere down. Liliana, would you be able to put that link in the chat?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I also don't want anyone to feel like, oh, I don't have health insurance, therefore I can't get help for my child. I mean, don't let that be ever a barrier in terms of getting help for your student.
Yes, there are a lot of free resources. The Common Voice is a free resource that is a community support group for parents. There are many free resources available on these lists, and they will generally state whether they're free, whether it's Medicare or private insurance. Generally, there will be a number of free resources available.
Thank you.
And a lot of agencies, if do not have insurance, they also provide a sliding scale. So if the families end up paying a very a small number.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So our crisis lines here are really for somebody who's actively thinking about suicide, maybe, you know, working on a plan, having some of these numbers around your house may be a good option because your kid may not talk to you about it to begin with. But we want to make sure that even if they're not talking to us, they're talking to somebody. These are crisis lines that are not just immediate response. So the Suicide Prevention Lifeline and the Pierce County Crisis Line, they provide an immediate response for somebody who's currently in a extreme crisis. The Oasis Youth Center, they call it a warm line because it's really, you can call and talk to somebody. And they have trained people to talk to anybody, all ages. They even have youth that volunteer with them as well to talk to teens, which is amazing. And they can really just talk through a whole bunch of different issues that kids might be facing. And they can just be that ear also. If a kid is afraid of talking to anybody, they may break the ice on a warm line like this and have the encouragement to talk to a trusted adult. Teen Link is fantastic. Kids can text Teen Link also. Teen Link is kids that are trained to respond to other kids that are struggling. So they receive suicide prevention training and how to respond to kids. Yeah, via phone or text. It's an amazing service. And the Trevor Project is also an amazing crisis hotline to be able to call. They're specifically focused on LGBTQ kids. So they have somewhere to call where they feel safe that somebody's going to understand what they're going through.
And even having these symbols around your home, even if your kid is not ready to talk about it with you yet, right? It can just be a conversation starter, right? It is showing your youth, right, that you are willing to talk about that you're willing to listen. So even just using that as a symbol of that.
I love
Absolutely.
that. Not yet. They're just not ready yet. But
yeah, we're just kind of warming them up to being able to talk to somebody. So for questions and follow-up, we're going to provide you with the copy of the presentation today. There are links in this presentation that you can access all of these resources. So it's good to go through if you've missed something along the way. There's mental health provider lists that are in there as well, as we mentioned. There's crisis line information and parent support resources that we'll be sending out also. And here's my information and Liliana's information as well. If you want to reach out to see what it is that we're doing in schools, and maybe we can connect you with somebody in a school, you can directly contact us.
thank you for doing that. I appreciate that. So oftentimes, like, well, I just want to talk to you.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to say is that we are recording this, and we will put it on our school district YouTube page. So when you go to YouTube, there just seems like a whole bunch of videos. Just go to the very top, and there's something called playlists. Click playlist, look for Parent Academy, and then we list everything that we've done for Parent Academy. And so that way, this may be also a way to talk to somebody that you don't know how to even broach this topic, but then you can share this information. And as I always say, the more that we know, the better we are able to help support our own families, ourselves, and our community. So we do have. We haven't had many things in the Q&A. I know that Liliana and I have been putting stuff in the chat all evening long. But if you do have a question, please don't hesitate to bring that up. Or if you have a question that you would just really like to talk to either Liliana or Stacy, please, you can email them and they can get back to you. but both of you, this has been, I'm looking at the time and I kind of can't believe the time went by so quickly because it was such great information and such a wealth of support and really something that parents can do. I didn't feel like as you were giving this presentation that this was out of my wheelhouse and there was no way I could do it. So thank you for that. As I've got a little cough here, I'll let you answer.
Well, and thank you for the opportunity for let us being here, right? Because we know that this conversation is difficult the majority of the times, and we feel a lot of anxiety just even thinking about it. But encouraging that anxiety to move you, right? To show that you care for the ones that are close to you, your children, and also the children that are in your community. Within some of the resources that we share too with our program, we're also very connected with other agencies, and we're also very connected with community members and community groups. So for example, if you like the task force, the Youth and Families Thrive Now task force is very, very great when parents are there and available, because they bring those community-based organizations to present about their services and how they can engage, right? Because we are also, those community-based organizations also provide other youth programs, right? When we're talking about increasing those protected factors, we need to know which programs are available and how can we engage our youth in those programs. And that communication in those groups, I wish you can all see that and you can all participate. Feel free to reach out and let us know if you want to participate, because it's very, very powerful stuff. Right? We have, for example, we brainstorm ideas. There's people who bring like, hey, I want to do this thing, or I want to increase these things in the school. What can we do? Right? You are more than welcome to bring those topics, or even you're just curious, you want to know more. So feel free to reach out, definitely.
Well, thank you both. This was great. And as you said, it really is powerful, but empowering.
Yes.
You have empowered us as parents and community members to have and start the conversation. So I do appreciate that.
Yeah, and I do want to say, I'm a parent too. And I know all of these things. I train people in it. It's still hard. It's not an easy thing to do, even when you do have this information. So I want to recognize that and also encourage you to be brave. It can be hard to have these conversations, to even think about the possibility. But by being brave and being there for our kids, we have the ability to save a life. And that's really what it boils down to.
Yes.
I'm glad you said that. Something else I think that I had heard before, and I really, it really kind of changed my thinking, was talking about suicide won't make it happen, but not talking about suicide won't prevent it. And so we're going to leave you with that, our audience with that, because that is so important. And that's what we're trying to do, is preventing that suicide and saving that life. Yes. So Stacy, Liliana, thank you for being with us. What wonderful partners we have in the Puget Sound Educational Service District. And so PSESD is what we call it. So I almost had to think there. But thank you for being here and for helping our parents. Thank you for sharing so beautifully all of your wonderful resources and being so generous with that. Thank you all for joining us for Parent Academy. And again, please talk to others and share what you have learned. Give them the resources, because the more that we're all educated, then the more students and kids we can help. So thank you all. I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.